the original work of Su Qing's autobiographical novel 10 Years of Marriage Chapter 5 Two Cherries. From then on, I got to know Yang Qimen day by day. I didn't go to the library until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day, and he always sat there by himself first. When he saw me, he nodded with a half smile, but immediately moved his eyes to the book and said nothing more. As usual, I sat opposite him, but for some reason, since he came to visit me that night, I felt embarrassed and sat in another corner with my face turned away. However, after I sat down, I regretted it endlessly. Stand up. Why don't I take another look at him with black leather shoes, gray trousers, and always wearing a pair of platinum-rimmed glasses? I think of the platinum-rimmed glasses, and I think of his scholarly demeanor. Although he is not as beautiful as Xian, his attitude is much more stable and generous than Xian. Comparing him with Xian, I no longer have the heart to read Kiao Suo. A kind of raging desire forced me to turn around. I seemed to feel that everyone in the room was looking at me with burning eyes. I didn't dare to do it several times, but finally I could see through the glass of his glasses with platinum rims. Got it. But what makes me most surprised is that there is no contact, no communication, and some functions are not working. He still reads his book quietly. The book is very thick, and of course, it is about engineering. So I got angry. Are people who talk about science all dead pigs and can't understand some customs? It is said that Edison passed by the laboratory on his wedding day, walked over to do his experiments, and left the bride outside the door for a long time without any reason. Now he actually ignores me when he is reading. Everyone in the room is looking at me, but he is the only one who ignores me. Bah! Did he really think of himself as Edison and treat me as his bride? What a woman who is not shy. When I thought of this, I couldn't help but beat myself bitterly and couldn't think about it anymore. A wisp of melancholy emerged from the bottom of my heart like a light smoke, permeating the entire library and the entire universe. I just felt that everything in front of me was blurred, and the lines of words turned into smoke like fog, fog like smoke. Slowly, a man in gray clothes came out of the smoke. It was him who stood beside me. I felt dazed and just waited for him to speak, and the smoke dispersed, revealing the whole body. There is no place for light, but he kept silent. I raised my head and looked at it strangely. It turned out that he was flipping through a copy of Webster's dictionary, which was placed on the water shelf next to me. It was a thick, old, cold, soulless thing. The fog condensed into water, and the water turned into ice. The ice cubes were cold and heavy on my heart. I left the library trembling and ran forward in a hurry. It was dark ahead and the pale yellow sun was setting. It's not even 7 o'clock, right? The library door was still closed, so I came out first and walked forward hurriedly. There was a rush of footsteps chasing me from behind. It was him who stopped beside me and said, "Let's go have dinner together." "That's fine," I replied softly, feeling dazed in my heart. The whole winter passed in a daze. Every day I read in the same room with him, and every night I had dinner with him at the same table. He is from Hunan and has a tough, frank and optimistic character. We talked little, but speculated. I often feel that I have something important to say to him, but I just can't say it. It was finally mid-February of the Gregorian calendar. I didn't go back during the winter vacation. Xianzheng wrote to me, because I replied and said I couldn't go. He was unhappy to go home alone. He stayed at his grandmother's house for the new year, and was naturally happy to have Ruixian by his side. What about me? We didn't have much to eat at home, so on Lunar New Year's Eve, he bought a salted duck and I drank half a glass of wine. The cold winter is over, and soon spring is here again. One time after dinner, he suddenly said to me, "How about going to Huhu to play?" I said, "That's fine." "Then, go and change into thicker clothes. It's still cold," he said slowly, looking at me. "You seem to be eating lately." I remained silent, feeling surprised that he was actually paying attention to my recent poor appetite. I thought he only cared about engineering books and Webster's dictionary. After changing into a thick woolen coat, he and I took a car to Huhu. There were very few tourists by the lake. We walked slowly, me in front and him behind. It was a moonlit night, and the cold light made the place look desolate. I said, "Spring hasn't arrived yet. Why go to the lake?" He replied, "That's because you're not feeling well, so you're not interested, and you're letting down the beautiful scenery. In that case, you'd better go back." On the way back, I felt really sick and a little nauseous. But the next night, I was the first to suggest going for a lake tour. And he said, "Since you're not feeling well, you'd better not go." I said, maybe it would be better to go for a walk. So we went again. On the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, we went to Haijian in the evening. And it almost became a course. He seemed to really believe that walking was good for my health. And as for me, seeing him happy made me happy too. The moon finally gradually turned into a hook shape, getting thinner and thinner, like a woman's eyebrows. On the bank of the dark lake, he looked at my face, and after a while, he said in a low voice, "You have become much thinner recently. Do you feel uncomfortable?" "Yes," I said, because I wanted to say that it was because something on my body didn't come, but I still couldn't say it. He asked anxiously, but I just shook my head. Finally, he decided to send me to Gulu Hospital for a checkup tomorrow. When he arrived at Gulu Hospital, he rushed to register. The person at the registration desk asked, "What disease are you looking for?" He looked at me, and I turned around and ignored him, whispering, "Gynecology." He registered a special number for me and walked me into the examination room. A kind old doctor asked me about my illness. I wanted to say, but I just couldn't speak. I turned my head and looked at him, intending to tell him to get out, but he didn't understand. Instead, he urged me anxiously, "Tell the doctor quickly what's wrong with you. I only know that you have a bad appetite recently. What do you want to eat?" After a while, the cook brought it up but said not to eat. The doctor smiled and nodded, and asked me to go inside. He sat in the examination room and waited. When he saw the doctor leading me out and my face was full of tears, he asked in confusion, What? You don't have any disease, do you?" The doctor patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, there is nothing wrong with you. Your wife is pregnant." His lips suddenly turned white, and he said to me in a trembling voice, "You." I didn't dare to look at his face anymore, so I turned around and walked out. I don't know how far I've walked, but suddenly a rickshaw came out of the sloping field. He quickly grabbed my arm and said, "Be careful." After the car passed, he let go of his hand, and everyone continued to walk in silence. After a long while, I trembled and shouted, "His people." This was the first time I called his name. He said, "I'm here. Do you need my help?" His voice was soft, but slightly trembling, like the floating water of the back lake. I suddenly became bold and told him frankly, "I am a married person." He seemed to feel relaxed unexpectedly, and said with a sigh of relief, "That's great. Otherwise I plan to marry you right away, and your child will be mine." After saying this, he seemed a little agitated. Sad look. I felt infinite melancholy in my heart again. I wanted to say something to him, but there was nothing to say. He sent me all the way to the girls' dormitory. I didn't go to the library on the second day, nor on the third day. I had dinner in the dormitory, alone. On the fourth night, he came to see me. His face was much more haggard. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes were untidy. Seeing me, he seemed to smile. After a while, he said hoarsely, "Let's go to Huhu to talk." I followed him to the lakeside silently. The night was so quiet that it seemed lonely and scary. He ignored me and looked at the lake alone for a long time. Then he turned back and said to me, "It doesn't matter if you take the boat, right?" I nodded, and as soon as I got on the boat, he rowed vigorously towards the center of the lake. The lake was dark and dark, getting deeper as it reached the center. There was no moon in the sky. It was pitch black, and there were few tourists, making the surroundings look dark and desolate. He rowed hard, as if he was looking for an outlet for his infinite anger. I suddenly felt scared, thinking that he was not preparing to capsize the boat and die with me, his people. I shouted tremblingly, holding his arms with both hands. He stopped holding the oar and asked loudly, "What's the matter?" I became even more frightened after hearing this, trembling, looking at his face and begging, "I can't help you, his people." I thought that's a good thing. His voice was low and a little miserable, which made me even more scared. "You won't, right?" I asked repeatedly. His answer was straightforward. "I would never hate you." "No," I continued. "I mean, you won't commit suicide, right?" "Why should I commit suicide?" He laughed loudly. I was scared and ashamed. So he picked up the oar, made a cross on the water, and said, "Let me tell you, I said that was a very good thing, but you wouldn't understand me. As he said that, he took my hand and squeezed it hard. The pain made me shed tears, and while breaking away, I said, "What is this?" He seemed startled and became wet with his voice. He said, "Let's row back to the shore." When I got back to the dormitory, I cried most of the night. I couldn't bear to leave him. I only hated myself and the piece of flesh in my belly. That night I had a criminal thought and wanted to have an abortion. I suffered from insomnia at night and woke up late in the morning. Just when I was sleeping soundly, the concierge came and called, saying there was a guest. I wondered why there was a visitor in the morning, so I hurriedly freshened up and ran out to see him, sitting on the sofa in the living room, his face pale, staring at the 2 books on the table. "That's not like an engineering book. Strange." Suddenly, he stood up, and with a half smile, he handed me these 2 books and said, "That's for you. I went to the flower archway to buy it early this morning. I was sorry for you last night." I took the books and took a look. It turned out that one was Common Sense of Hygiene for Pregnant Women and the other was a spotlight on parenting. After reading them, I couldn't help but be so embarrassed that I couldn't even lift my head. With the book in my hand, I felt that it would be inappropriate to put it down. Not letting go is not the case. With a stern look on his face, he just said, "Come back to the library in the afternoon." He stood up and left. I stared blankly at pregnant women's hygiene knowledge and parenting, and considered the issue of abortion. When I met him in the library in the afternoon, he greeted me with a smile, but his expression was a bit miserable. While reading, I peeked at him from time to time. His eyes were staring at the ground, as if he was looking at something else. He was not looking at me or reading. In the evening, I had dinner with him again. After dinner, we went for a walk to the lake together. The weather is getting warmer and there are more tourists, but we came back very early. He said he was afraid that I would be too tired. His attitude was very gentle, and he carefully protected me all the way, as if he was afraid that I would fall or be bumped into. He said that women during this period should take a walk and look at the beautiful scenery outside, but they should not overwork themselves. These words seemed to be taken from Common Sense of Hygiene for Pregnant Women. He had read this book, and I couldn't help but blush. He is about to graduate, and I'm afraid of delaying his homework. But he said it didn't matter and he still came to walk with me every morning and evening. However, he said that Huhu is too far away and one has to take a car to get there, which is dangerous. Let's take a walk nearby. Therefore, Arctic Pavilion, Jiming Temple, Taisheng and other places have become places we often visit. Sometimes he even buys fruit cakes and other food for me to eat. He eats very little himself. Really, he has even reduced his appetite recently. I always eat a lot for every dinner, but he seems to be full in one fell swoop. He ordered a lot of dishes, all of which I liked, and he didn't even mention his favorite chili because he was afraid that my eyes would itch after looking at it. And according to the book, pregnant women are not allowed to eat any spicy food. I wanted to have an abortion, but I was afraid of being in danger. I wanted to ask him several times, but found it difficult to do so. Moreover, he seemed to pay more attention to fetal hygiene than maternal hygiene. He bought me a lot of nutritious food and ate it with me every day, but he refused to talk to me much. It's finally been more than 6 months. Even though I'm wearing newly made baggy clothes, I'm still worried about not being able to tell. I'm harboring a ghost in my heart every day. At the same time, my inexplicable motherly love is also happening. Every time I walk through a department store, I always look at her. Take a look at the small clothes, hats and toys displayed in the window. Even when I see a young couple walking by with their children on the road, I will stare at them for a while. How happy that would be, I thought, with a beautiful child in the hands of his young mother, and standing next to his mother is a smiling, proud father, the child's father. My child should have a father who smiles proudly, right? So I wrote and told Xian. Xian advised me to go home immediately and asked when I would arrive in Shanghai, and that he could pick me up at the station. I made a date with him and told the people about it. On the night before we left, the people invited me to dinner and then hired a car and asked me to ride in it. I said, "The night train does not leave until after 11 o'clock. What are you anxious about?" He said, "Let's go to Huhu to play for a while. The cherries are in market. I'll treat you to some cherries." so I followed him through the Wuzhou garden while eating cherries. He said, "What is your favorite place here? Let's sit down and talk." I said I like rowing. Today is a moonlit night, and the lake is sparkling. In the middle of the lake we saw the bright moon shadow, and also saw the shadows of the two of them sitting side by side. I said sadly, "I'm really sorry for you, the people." He just whispered, "No, that's a very good thing." Why? Because I like freedom. I hope I can be free and run around after graduation. I didn't want to marry a woman. Now that you have gone, that is a good thing, he said quietly, looking at the moon shadow in the lake. But I couldn't help but sob, feeling very sad. I lowered my head and looked at the figures in the water. He wiped away my tears, reached out and took out a single cherry from the basket, thrust it into my hand like a child, and said, "Don't cry, eat it." I shook my head and handed the cherry back to him. It was a branch of 3 cute little red cherries. The top 2 were about the same size, while the other one looked smaller and lower. He held it in his hand and looked at it for a while, then picked off the smaller and lower one, held it in his hand, and said, "I am like this extra cherry. I should get rid of it. Now there are only 2 left here. 1 cherry is for you, and the other is for you." He handed the cherry into my hand again. Your head quietly hid in the clouds and cried. I didn't dare to look at the 2 figures in the lake anymore. I just let him help me to the shore and took me to the station. I said goodbye and the train flew away. I couldn't help but hold these 2 cherries in my hands.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.